Now in this video I want to talk to you about SQL Server service accounts. Each service that you run in SQL Server, and I did a video called SQL Server Components, and by that I'm talking about like reporting services, integration services, those sorts of things, the different functionalities that you can install and have SQL Server perform. Each one of these runs in the context of a security account. Now you'll also hear this called a startup account. But the bottom line is each bit of functionality in SQL Server has to abide by the Windows security model. Okay, so when a particular service needs to do something on SQL Server, it has to log into SQL Server, and then it needs the appropriate permissions to do whatever it needs to do. Now, what we really want to do here for security reasons is use a different dedicated account for each service. Now, this is a very confusing topic for a lot of people, and it really shouldn't be. What I want to do is kind of crack this nut open, if you will, and let's talk about an easy way to go about this. Now, it really comes down to this. You have three choices as to what kind of account that you want to use. You can use a local user account on the machine, a domain user account, or a built-in system account. You can go out to Microsoft's website and you can search on SQL Server service accounts and so forth, and you can find a lot of information out there, and you really should go read that stuff. But let me kind of take you through the steps here. First of all, which one of these should we use? Well, a local user account, we can use this if the SQL Server is not part of a domain. Now, when would that happen? Well, let's say that the SQL Server is providing some storage capabilities for web applications. It's out in the DMZ and it's not really part of a domain. If that's the situation and this server is not going to be communicating with other network resources, you can use a local user account, but you don't need to give it Windows Administrator permissions. Now keep in mind that these service accounts are a prime target for hackers, and you don't need to give them more permissions than they really need. I'll give you the fix on that a little bit later on. Hang on. The next choice you have is a domain user account. If the service or if this SQL Server is going to interact with other network services or access file shares or utilize the whole linked server scenario to connect to other SQL servers, then you're going to have to allow the service to run in the context of a domain user account. So the startup account will have to be a domain user account. Now, the worst choice is a built-in system account, and for some bizarre reason, administrators tend to gravitate toward this one. It's not a good choice. It has way too many privileges, and we don't want to do that. Here's the bottom line. You will see this quite a bit in marketing materials, but this is one instance where it's really true in the real world. Microsoft has created some groups. Now, they started this in SQL Server 2005 and they continue in 2008, and that is they have created some groups for you out there, and these groups have the appropriate permissions. All you have to do is provide the user account during the installation, and depending on the service that you're creating, when you tell it what account to use, it will drop it into the appropriate group. How cool is that? So here's the bottom line. You really need to choose, do you want to do a local account or a domain account? For 99% of the installations out there, it's usually best to go ahead and do a domain account. So what you want to do before the installation starts, you want to go out and create a minimally privileged account for each service that you're going to utilize. You'll need one for the main SQL Server service. You'll need one for the SQL Server agent, and then you need to start looking at the various pieces and parts that you might install: integration services, reporting services, analysis services. So create an account for each one of those. Now this account should not be used for anything else. Now during the installation, you're going to see a list of each service. You're just going to assign whichever account you created for that service to that service. Now SQL Server, once you tell it what account to use for what service, as the installation progresses, SQL Server will add the account you just told it to the appropriate group, and it will apply the needed permissions. And that's a key word, needed permissions. Only the permissions that are required to do the job of that service will be applied, and everything is cool. after the installation. If for whatever reason you want to come back later and make adjustments to what you've done, you can use the SQL Server Configuration Manager to change these things. Now, you should always use the SQL Server Configuration Manager to change these accounts because it changes it everywhere that SQL needs to see it, and it just keeps everything neat and tidy and keeps everything working. But that's the bottom line on the SQL Server service accounts. So really, step one on installation is going to be go create the accounts that are going to run your services, and then we will choose those accounts when we actually go through the process of installing SQL Server.